things to do in daily life, as well as, getting back in the swing of things with their career.
So this isn't in like the notes that I took for today, but I just thought of
That's
this.
okay. You can always be spontaneous. I promise.
Yeah, I'm going to improv here. But sometimes getting your dream job isn't, and I think I'll talk about this a little bit more, but sometimes getting your dream job isn't the end all be all, right? So you can have a great job, but your personal life is tanking. Like that can happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's important to make sure that you take time for yourself, do that check-in, no matter where you're at. And so if you do find yourself, because sometimes we don't have control over how things come to us, so we may have to take that job we hate, making sure that you compensate for that with something else. So thinking about, okay, here's the job that I can't stand, but I'm going to work it for X number of hours a week, making sure that you do something completely on the opposite end of that spectrum so that you can get the fulfillment somewhere else, right? It's important to make sure that, here's the reality. We spend more time at a job than we do, pandemic aside.
Right.
At a job than we do with our own families and doing things that we want to do. And so when we have to go to this job for X number of hours a week that really drains us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, we have to compensate for that somehow. So that's really important, just to kind of just keep that in your mind. Is like, I'll put a pin in that for now. We'll come back to it. But that's really important to think about when we're talking about time for self and what our responsibilities really are. Because sometimes, I'm sure like some listeners will say like, okay, well, that's all fine and well, lady, but in reality, I need to take this job. That's great. Compensate for it somewhere else. So we'll kind of pin that in for another time a little bit later. But sure. So I like to use for this, I had a client that I was completing an intake, and she wasn't very sure if she wanted services or not with us, if she wanted to go to therapy. She knew that she needed it, but we kept circling back to this idea of, well, maybe I'll start therapy once I get a job, or once I get this, or once I get this. And as much as I can appreciate that, because yes, we need money to live, right? Regardless of regardless of what the situation actually is, we need to have a job, most of us anyway. So when we have that like conundrum and we have like this, okay, I know that I need help, I know that I need something else, you can't always say, well, until this happens, right? It's like people who save their whole life to take like this really amazing vacation, like, oh, once I retire, what if you never get there? Right. And I'm not trying to like damper on the episode, but I mean, if you never get to that, there's never going to be a right time for therapy, for, that dream vacation, it's going to happen when it's going to happen. And so if you need, in this client example that I was using, she really needed therapy. That's really what she needed. Because if you're trying to get a job and you're stressed out and you're overwhelmed and there's all these things going on, I understand that you don't want to take the time to go to therapy, because you could do that. You could spend that time doing resumes or job hunting, but at the same time, if you go into an interview and all of your stuff is coming in there with you, how are you going to be clear-headed?
Good point. Very good point.
Right. I like to use the example of like different ways of describing this, but it's either like a full cup or like a full closet, right? So using the cup example, every day we have our things that fill our cup up. So we start our day with an empty cup. And as the day goes on, right, someone cuts us off, and so we get mad about that, and we just put that in our cup, and then we go to work and our boss does this, or we're trying to, we get that email that says, oh, thank you for applying, but right. It's not out. So all these things fill up this cup. And if you don't drain that, then you start the following day with a full cup. It never goes away. So now you have a full cup starting your day, knowing full well that that day is going to bring its own things that are going to fill up that cup. And that's where we see, I talk about things in terms of anger. Anger is a secondary emotion, primary being fear, shame, guilt, stuff like that. And so if we have this full cup, anger might be because we're feeling overwhelmed. And instead of saying, ooh, I need to take a moment and drain this cup so that I can be clear-headed about something, I'm just going to get angry and lash out at someone because that's going to make me feel good. And then that'll help me shove everything down in that cup and contain it.
Right, but it comes at a cost, obviously.
Exactly. And so what's really important is figuring out a way to drain the cup so that you can be the best version of you in our context of being in an interview, being clear-headed when you're trying to work through resumes, job applications, putting your best foot forward. How are you going to do that if you're worried about, having to do the dishes or having to do this or running after the kids or all these things? If you don't drain that somehow, you're never going to get to the clear path that you need to get to in order to, make that next job move happen.
Got it. That's actually, I love that analogy of the cup or the closet that you can't pack anything else into.
Right.
And that's a really good way. And I think that illustrates things perfectly. But I do want to, I'm going to kind of needle on this a little bit further because I want to drill a little bit more because there might be somebody out there, and Christine, I'm really curious as the advice and techniques that you might have for this person. There might be somebody listening right now who is our worst case scenario. The person who is either barely afloat financially and is soon to drown financially, no job, ton of bills, no savings, 2 kids, husband's out of work too, whatever it might be. How does this person who has really limited resources help keep themselves in a healthy place when it comes to job hunting and dealing with their daily grind? And maybe, they can't go get their, $3 coffee from Starbucks that helps them drain the cup because that's macaroni for the kids tonight.
Right. You need to be honest with yourself. And I don't mean just saying it just to say it, like, oh yeah, like I'm going to be honest with myself. We need, as people, to really be honest with what we need. And when I say what we actually need, it might be, and I know that this is something that I definitely do a lot of, is I make lists.
Right. And
people might say like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. But sometimes I get overwhelmed to the point where I'm trying to, it's like my sink is overflowing, right? And I'm trying to like contain it somehow, but I can't. And so instead of just trying to contain, let it all spill out. Like, let it all out. If you need to write down a list of all of the things that are like making you really mad, put it all down on a list. Because once it's out there, then you can manage it. But if you're sitting there and you're thinking about one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing, and you're constantly overwhelmed, you can't ever like see the larger picture. You're going to be moving from point to point to point to point without conceptualizing the whole thing. And so it's really important to be honest. And I make a list, right? Saying I need to do the dishes, do the laundry, do this. Same thing with job hunting. What's your realistic goal? Like if you give yourself a very general goal, you're never going to accomplish anything. And then that goes back to what we're talking about, the hierarchy of needs. How are you going to feel accomplished and raise your self-esteem if every day you're giving yourself this really lofty goal of some general thing? Like, I'm going to apply to a bunch of jobs today. Okay, well, what's a bunch? How are you going to know that you did that or accomplished it? How are you going to feel good about that? If you decide to write down, okay, I'm going to apply to 10 jobs today. I'm going to do that by 2:30 p.m. I'm going to give myself an hour break. You're not going to feel bad about taking a break. You are going to feel accomplished because you can actually check something off of a list.
I love that.
And you can see it. You can see like, wow, look at all the things I did. Because sometimes our negative self-talk is so huge that I'm a failure all day. Like no matter how many things I actually got done that day, I'm still going to feel like a failure because I don't have anything visually that tells me, yeah, I did something today. All I know is that there's still all these other things to do. That may be true, but if you have a list of things that you checked off, you can say like, yeah, maybe I still need to do this, this, and this, but I did accomplish these 12 things today on my list.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. And that actually, I'm glad you said that, because that kind of technique, like I'm a list maker myself for exactly that reason. And I've never actually been in the situation where it's been that bad where I need to, grind out as many job applications as I can in, a short amount of time. But I think that even in something like this, which, this whole show is now my own new business venture, I have so many things to do, like website design and things like that I have to make this list. And I think it's a great all around tactic for anybody, whether you're in that almost drowning situation or even if you're not even close to it.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do only like job related tasks. I mean, one thing on there can be take a walk. One thing on there could be play with my kids for 30 minutes and again, it's all what you make of it. Some people might think that journaling is helpful, right? I'm going to write about all the things I did today and, maybe that'll help. But it's important to at least schedule yourself in some way, because I think we talked in the last episode a little bit about continuity, and it's so important to have some form of stability. And if you don't have something stable, like a schedule or something that the job might provide you with, right? And I feel like a lot of listeners are probably thinking about this and thinking of it in the terms of the pandemic. Like, we're not used to working from home. I know I'm not used to working from home. I'm used to being in the office by like 8:30. I do this, clients until this time. I go home, I do this thing. And I came into like my home office and now I'm sitting here like, now what do I do? What is my day going to look like? I don't know. So having a schedule of I'm going to check my voicemail this many times a day. These are the times I'm going to check it. Those are the things that really get me moving and like, oh yeah, like I'm going to do this today and I'm going to do this. And so having that thing, it makes you feel productive. It makes you feel better about yourself. And it might check off a number of those things on the needs list.
Interesting. And it's interesting you mentioned the pandemic, because that has thrown so many things on its head. And for so many people, work and home have become the same place. Right. And I'm curious, and maybe this is just a little slight steer off the main topic that we're doing here. How can folks learn to set boundaries on maybe some of the new expectations that companies are having for them, since they're maybe working from home, and whether it's in a job they don't like, or maybe they just got a job and it's like, this is really strange. How can folks kind of look to set those boundaries and what's healthy?
So I just saw like this amazing thing on Instagram about it, and I cannot for the life of me remember off the top of my head what it is. But there was it basically was a quote about like, your worth is not tied to your productivity.
Okay. I've seen that. Yes. I've read exactly that.
And people need to know that, that we are in a situation now that we do not understand. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because through change comes like revitalization, right?
Yes.
And transformation. But we don't know how to navigate that. And sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know. And taking care of yourself is doing something about that. This is not, oh, I'm not doing anything. This is giving time to yourself, making time for yourself in whatever way is appropriate for you, so that you are able to do the work you need to do